The factory floor buzzed with quiet failure. Steel towers loomed overhead, machinery humming with tension, not function. Somewhere between the rows of automated arms and conveyor belts sat a behemoth, the company's million-dollar gamble, silent and stubborn. 2 weeks of tech teams, late-night shifts, and flown-in engineers had produced nothing but blinking lights and error codes. No progress, no explanations, just a monument to a $6 million mistake. The air smelled of coffee gone cold and nerves gone tighter. Screens blinked, supervisors whispered, and attention hovered like smoke. Thick, invisible, suffocating. Then he arrived. Leonard Graves stepped off a sleek black chopper, his sunglasses still on as he entered through the executive door. His presence cracked the silence. Tall, silver-haired, and surgically confident, Leonard moved like a man who'd never heard no in a language he understood. His suit screamed Manhattan. His watch screamed wealth. His voice, when it finally cut through the warehouse noise, screamed power. "I flew across the country to deal with a blinking paperweight," he said, pacing toward the machine. "If nobody here can solve it, maybe we should ask the janitor." Scattered chuckles, nervous eyes, then silence. Because someone was, in fact, standing by the janitor's closet. Not a janitor, though he looked the part. A boy. 16, maybe. Mud-caked boots, rolled-up sleeves, worn plaid. He leaned against a mop handle like it belonged to him, eyes quiet, unreadable. Leonard raised a brow. "You," he said, pointing like the scene needed a punchline. "Think you can do better than my engineers?" The room froze. The boy didn't. He stepped forward slowly, each boot tapping across the concrete like a dare. People shifted. Whispers flitted across the rows. Nobody had seen him before. Nobody knew why he was even in the building. But he didn't blink. Didn't stutter. Just looked at the machine, not the man. "What's your name?" Leonard asked, frowning now. "Noah," the boy replied. "That's it?" "That's all you need." Leonard smirked. "Well, Noah, impress me." Noah knelt beside the control panel, hands moving with a calm that unnerved the techs watching. He didn't touch the screen. He reached beneath it, where a cluster of wires had been labeled non-essential and ignored by every professional who came before. He popped a cover loose, rerouted 2 lines, adjusted a dial with the edge of a broken screwdriver he pulled from his back pocket. Then he stood. "Try it now," he said. The machine blinked once, then twice, then roared to life like it had just remembered its purpose. Belts turned, arms moved, lights aligned. Complete silence followed. Then gasps. Then a stunned voice from the tech table. It's working." Leonard's smirk vanished. All eyes shifted to Noah. No one laughed anymore. No one dared speak. Because at that moment, they all understood. This kid wasn't just some farm boy tagging along with a janitor. And his father. Well, it turns out his father wasn't just anyone either. But that part of the story hadn't been told yet. Leonard tilted his chin toward the boy, voice slick with performative charm. "Well? Feel like giving it a try, farm boy? Who knows? Maybe luck's all it takes." The crowd chuckled on cue. Not because the joke was clever, because the cameras were on, and the moment had been staged. They expected the punchline to be him, mud boots, flannel, and all. Noah didn't smile. He simply looked up. Calm. Still. Unshaken. Then he moved. He walked with quiet purpose, slicing through a sea of engineers and project heads like a knife through fog. They stepped aside awkwardly, some stifling laughs, others frozen with uncertainty. No one knew what to say. No one dared stop him. Leonard smirked and folded his arms. This was entertainment now, a viral moment waiting to happen. But near the edge of the crowd, Roy Whitaker stepped forward. "Noah's just here visiting, sir," Roy said, his voice strained. "He's not—" Leonard lifted a hand. "Relax, it's just a dead pile of wires, right?" The crowd murmured again. All eyes followed the boy in the faded flannel. Noah approached the massive unit and laid his palm flat against its steel side like he was listening. His fingers traced across the smudged interface, slow, deliberate, until he found the main input. He scanned the diagnostics, then crouched beside the base of the machine, where the wiring converged. Something shifted in his expression. "This connection's flipped," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. Several engineers leaned closer, frowning. Noah reached into his canvas backpack and pulled out a stubby screwdriver. No hesitation. No doubt. One of the junior execs opened his mouth to protest, but Leonard raised a finger, eyes gleaming. "Let him go. This is gold." The phones kept rolling. Noah popped the lower plate open and examined the machine's inner workings. His gaze followed the tangle of wires, tracing paths of signal and power. He found a red line looped incorrectly, another frayed near its bracket, and a sensor misaligned so subtly it had escaped every previous inspection. "Wrong polarity," he said simply. "Power shorts out before the cycle completes." He clipped 2 wires, reversed the leads, realigned the sensor. Then, without fanfare, reached up and tapped the manual reset. A second passed. Then the hum began. Low, deep, rising. The control lights blinked once, then all turned green in a smooth, synchronized wave. The conveyor shifted. The belts spun. The automated arms extended in perfect rhythm. The factory fell silent, then exploded into stunned gasps. Phones shook as hands struggled to keep filming. Technicians stared, mouths open. One woman let out an involuntary, "Holy hell!" And Leonard? Leonard's expression turned to concrete. He stepped forward, watching the machine cycle smoothly, perfectly, like it had never failed at all. Noah stood still, wiping his hands on the thighs of his jeans, unmoved by the attention. It wasn't pride, it wasn't shock, it was inevitability. He'd known it would work. The rest of them were just catching up. Leonard forced a tight smile as the machine completed its full sequence. Seamless. Flawless. "Beginner's luck," he said, louder than necessary, trying to swallow the panic behind his grin. But Clara Donnelly, a senior systems engineer, stepped forward slowly, her eyes still fixed on the boy. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't blinking. "That wasn't luck," she said softly. "That was mastery." She turned toward Noah. "How did you know what to fix?" Noah straightened, brushing dust from his jeans with slow, steady hands. "We built something similar on our farm," he replied. "Not this complex, but close enough to recognize what went wrong." Leonard's brow twitched. His voice turned sharp. "And who, exactly, is your father?" Noah met his stare. "Cole Whitaker." A sudden stillness spread like a shockwave through the room. Heads turned, breaths held. A few engineers whispered the name like it belonged in a textbook. Clara's mouth parted slightly in disbelief. Leonard's smugness vanished, drained from his face as though the name had slapped it off. Because Cole Whitaker wasn't just anyone. He was a myth. A man whose blueprints powered half the nation's most advanced manufacturing plants. An engineer whose retirement had come abruptly, quietly, years ago. Some thought he'd disappeared. Others whispered he was blacklisted. But no one imagined he'd traded innovation for soil and silence. Then the rear doors creaked open. Boots echoed against concrete. And through the entrance stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man in a work jacket and heavy stride, his weathered hands tucked into the pockets of faded jeans. Cole Whitaker. He didn't speak at first, just walked in like the ground belonged to him. Noah stood still, but his pulse thundered beneath the quiet. Cole's eyes scanned the room until they landed on his son. And for a breathless second, everything else vanished. Leonard moved fast, trying to reclaim the narrative. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, voice now syrupy but laced with urgency. We had no idea your son was in the building. Truly an unexpected development." No one was laughing anymore. This wasn't about a boy fixing a machine. It was about who he came from, and what that meant. Power shifted. The invisible hierarchy cracked. Cole offered a half-smile, his eyes full of something deeper than pride. Something ancestral. Worn. Quiet. Immovable. "Noah's right where he's meant to be," he said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He didn't just inherit my name, he inherited the fire, the logic, the love for building something that lasts. The silence was complete. Even the machine seemed to hum softer, like it too recognized what had just happened. An assistant rushed to Leonard, whispering something into his ear. Leonard nodded stiffly, sweat beginning to bead near his temple. He was losing the room. And worse, he knew it. Noah hadn't just repaired hardware. He'd exposed weakness and reintroduced a name that could topple reputations with its mere presence. What started as a joke had become something else entirely. The heir to a legacy had just stepped out of the shadows. And now, the whole factory was watching differently. The room that once watched him with condescension now stood on edge, awed, alert, humbled. A machine once labeled unfixable had come alive at the hands of a teenager in muddy boots. But that wasn't the headline. What mattered now was who he was. A black boy, a janitor's nephew, and a mind no one had seen coming. This machine wasn't broken because it was poorly built, Noah said, turning to the engineers. It was broken because it was rushed, installed like a checklist. But machines don't respond to shortcuts. They respond to care. His voice was firm, unshaken, but never arrogant. You don't just feed commands, he continued. You build with respect, with patience, with the understanding that every wire is part of a bigger heartbeat. The engineers didn't argue, because they couldn't. Clara Donnelly stepped closer, her eyes bright with admiration. You've just taught this entire floor something real, she said, offering a slow nod. You've got more to offer than most of us combined. She wasn't flattering him. She was acknowledging him. Leonard stood stiffly at the edge of it all, his smirk long gone. His gaze darted across the room, realizing he no longer held the center. The tide had turned. The joke had backfired. The room didn't laugh anymore. Mr. Whitaker, Leonard said carefully, addressing Cole. If you and your son are willing, we'd like to bring you both on permanently. We need people like you, builders who see beyond the blueprint. Cole didn't answer right away. He looked at his son. Noah's eyes glinted, not with pride, but with purpose. The kind that came from years of being underestimated. This is just the start, Noah said quietly. And it was. He wasn't being accepted as a favor. He was being recognized for his brilliance. The shift was seismic. Around him, the room softened. Not out of guilt, but respect. He was no longer the janitor's kid. He stood now as a visionary in a space that had once overlooked him. Still, Noah knew what this meant. The applause, the curiosity. It came with weight, with expectations, and with a responsibility to prove that where you come from should never limit where you're allowed to lead. He took a slow breath, feeling it all settle on his shoulders. Not as a burden, but as armor. Across the next few weeks, everything changed. Noah worked alongside Cole and Clara, diving deep into the factory's core systems. Where others saw efficiency, he saw possibilities. Where blueprints had gaps, he saw bridges. And every system he touched became smarter, leaner, stronger. He didn't just improve machines, he redesigned them. Soon, the air in the factory changed. There was momentum, excitement. Engineers who once doubted now asked for his input. Workers on the floor began calling him chief, with a half smile and full respect. Even Leonard, watching quietly from his corner office, started forwarding meeting invites. He couldn't ignore what was happening. Because this wasn't just talent. This was leadership. Clara became his fiercest advocate, calling out his innovations in boardrooms, defending his ideas when older voices pushed back. Little by little, the old barriers began to crumble. Noah's presence rewired more than machines. It rewired culture. And outside those walls, the world began to listen. The news spread like wildfire. Noah Whitaker, a name no one in the industry had known just weeks earlier, was now everywhere. Analysts discussed his designs. Tech blogs speculated about his future. Investors started circling the company like hawks drawn to heat. Stock prices surged. But if you asked Noah what mattered, he wouldn't talk about profits. He'd talk about perception. This wasn't about headlines or hashtags. It was about breaking the mold, about proving that genius didn't come with a pedigree or a polished resume. It came with work, with wounds, with relentless vision. Then came the reckoning. The board called an emergency meeting. Leonard Graves, once untouchable, was now untenable. His failure to recognize the brilliance standing in front of him, his resistance to change, it all added up to one thing: replacement. The board wanted leadership that could merge innovation with integrity. Cole was offered a senior consultancy, a guiding voice, a bridge. And Noah was offered command. The 16-year-old boy they once ignored was now asked to lead the company's innovation division, a lab dedicated to rebuilding everything from the ground up. A new era, built by a black teen who had once stood in the shadows of a mop bucket. At the formal announcement, the factory floor had been swept clean, lights polished, chairs arranged. Workers gathered. Engineers stood side by side with interns. Even the skeptics were there. Noah took the podium. He looked out over the crowd, his hands resting lightly on the steel edge, and let the moment breathe before he did. "I never planned to be here," he began. "I just knew something was broken. And when something's broken, I was raised to fix it." His voice was measured but warm. "I didn't come here for power. I came here to prove something simple, that brilliance can rise from anywhere, even a field, even a farmhouse, even a janitor's house." He paused. "And I'm not the exception. I'm just the beginning." Applause filled the room. From the back, Cole stepped forward, his expression unreadable, but his eyes proud. "You did more than fix their machine, son," he said quietly, just for Noah. "You fixed the way people see themselves." Noah nodded, but the smile that touched his face was tempered. He knew this was just the beginning of the real work. The challenge wasn't to break through. It was to hold the door open behind him. And he would. Because this opportunity wasn't just his. It belonged to every young black mind who had been ignored, every brown hand brushed aside, every genius hidden behind uniforms and assumptions. Over the weeks that followed, the entire factory changed. Noah's designs reshaped how systems moved, how machines thought, how people collaborated. He led with empathy, with fire, with unmatched clarity. And Clara remained his fiercest ally. Her voice in meetings sharp and unwavering, her belief in him unshakable. Old biases eroded. New trust took root. The culture that once resisted him now moved to his rhythm. And as Noah stood again one evening on the same floor where it all began, the machines around him hummed differently. Brighter, surer, alive with purpose. Not just because the wires had changed, but because the hearts inside the walls had too. The janitor's son had fixed more than a failed invention. He had fixed what no one else dared touch. The future. For Noah, success had never been about climbing ranks. It was about lifting the floor beneath him so others could rise too. He wanted to change what it meant to be seen, to prove that brilliance could come from the fields, from the quiet corners, from the people no one invited into the room. Then one morning, under a soft autumn sky, his phone rang. It was Leonard Graves. The same man who had once mocked his presence now spoke with measured respect. "Noah," Leonard said, his voice low and almost reverent, "we've been watching what you've built. I want you to lead something bigger, something that could redefine this industry." He outlined a new project, one that fused advanced tech with sustainability. A future-proof endeavor, bold and ambitious. But what struck Noah wasn't the offer. It was the tone. The man who once saw a boy in boots now saw a visionary. Noah paused before responding. His thoughts drifted to Cole, his father, his first teacher. He remembered the long nights under dim shop lights, the sound of worn tools scraping metal, and the calm voice that taught him patience, precision, and pride. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible. "I'll do it," Noah said finally. "But not for the title. I'll do it for the people who never got the chance to be heard." The weeks that followed were a blur of planning, blueprints, and powerful momentum. At the company-wide summit, Noah took the stage, not in a suit, but in a crisp, open collar and his signature work boots. He didn't need to change who he was to lead. That was the point. His voice rang clear through the auditorium. Innovation means nothing if it forgets the people it serves, he began. What we build must reflect not just the future, but the communities we build it for. He spoke of justice, of humility, of technology that uplifts instead of replaces. It wasn't just a speech, it was a blueprint for a better world. When he finished, there was no standing ovation. There was silence. The good kind. The kind that lingers when truth has landed. Outside those walls, Noah's story took flight. He wasn't a trending headline or a case study. He became a symbol of perseverance, of humility, of what happens when someone refuses to stay small. Media covered his journey not as a miracle, but as a movement. His name began appearing beside words like equity, genius, and trailblazer. But Noah didn't chase fame. He returned to the same workshop every night, sketching with grease-smudged fingers, dreaming of ways to make the next design simpler, smarter, more human. His legacy wasn't built in labs, it was born in motion, in action. In every young person who saw him and thought, maybe me too. What started with a dare from a CEO had become something far greater. A revolution. The machines he rebuilt ran smoother than ever. But the true impact was deeper. Because for every switch he rewired minds too. And as dusk draped the factory in golden light, Noah stepped onto the overlook. He stood tall, wind catching the edge of his jacket, eyes fixed on the horizon. The impossible didn't scare him anymore. It challenged him. Behind him stood a legacy. Ahead of him stretched the future. And within him burned the unshakable truth. He had rewritten the story. And he was just getting started.